Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
You are listening to Scream with Ryan C. Showers, the podcast for Scream fans just like you. Join Ryan every week as he takes a deep dive into the horror film series that defined the 90s and redefined the genre. Scream with Ryan C. Showers is your source for scene and quote analysis, character dissections, and the latest news about upcoming installments of the Scary Movie franchise.
I hear you like horror movies, Kirby, but do you like them as much as him?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. In the lead up to Scream 7, I couldn't be more grateful for everybody out there who listens to the show, who supports my podcast here, listening every episode, or on social media on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. If you would like to become a member of the podcast, come to the group Zooms, be on the show on a one-on-one or small group setting, consider joining the Patreon with Scream with Ryan C. Showers. In addition to the benefits of coming on the podcast, you can also join our social media groups, in particular on Instagram. That's the main hub of the podcast. I also do a monthly audio commentary of a Scream movie or a Scream-related film. From now through April, we are going to be having a new Scream movie audio commentary. So if you would like to hear my thoughts in an audio commentary form in the style of Wes Craven, Marion Maddalena, et al. Of the original trilogy, please consider subscribing and supporting the show. Thank you to every single person out there who subscribes on Patreon. Specifically, I need to thank my Daddy Ghost Faces and Stab investors over at Patreon. Starting out strong, we have Carrie Tenney, our Mama Ghostface, Corey Wilson, and Brett Janovich. And then we have Kevin Abner, Ali, Roy Garza, Josh Carr, Mark Rim, PWO5, Gustavo Mora, Mark Vieira, Scream Queens Podcast, both Josh and Justine, Joey Nobarini, aka The Vault, The Horror Project Podcast, David D., Jess Mariano, Sam Levy, Tamika Jones, Josh Calamari, and Andrew Dominguez. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. So last week you heard the final Scream, A Final Girl for the Final Time, the final time that I will be performing a script by Joey Vallese in this podcast format in between the times of Scream 6 and Scream 7. Oh my gosh, Joey, we did it, Joe.
We did. It is I admire sometimes. I'll open up all three docs and be like, I've written about 400 pages of Scream material over the past 2.5 years. And it's been a joy. It really has been a true joy. As I said in last week's intro, it never felt stupid or like silly or anything like that. And I think that once a few years ago, I became comfortable with the idea of these as these spec scripts and said to myself, to me, it felt no different than like if I had written a academic essay about the Scream franchise. I know it encyclopedically. I have ideas and I've got subtext that I want to explore. And I got to just do it in a creative way that then gets shared with everybody. And so I feel really privileged. It's an honor, as they say. But no, it really has been one of the most satisfying creative exercises of my life. And I feel very, very lucky that you commissioned me to do this, because that's what it is. You commissioned me. You have this platform, you have this audience, tens of thousands of people get to hear these, which is remarkable to me. And as somebody who is, my book, It Came From the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror, I think has sort of inserted me into the academic horror space. And so that meant that I had to treat this very seriously, and I wanted to treat it seriously. It's been an exhilarating experience. It's been satisfying. It's been pleasurable. It's been an outlet. And it's just been wonderful to like see these in my mind. And, do I keep my fingers crossed that maybe some producer somewhere is listening and will hire me to write a fucking Scream movie for real? Yes, of course. But this is a good second to that. Yeah. Really happy to have done it.
You should be so proud. And if people don't know by my social media posts, and by the way, I've talked about you literally on every single episode since, episode 30, in 2022, 2021, I'm one of Joey's biggest fans. I don't know if you could tell, even just separate from if I was just a regular listener of the podcast and he had gone through these scripts and written his book, I would still be one of his biggest fans. I think the world of your writing and everything you just described, even as you were talking there, I was starting to tear up. It's just like, this has been a really wild ride. It's given me so much personal satisfaction and creative satisfaction, but also just exhilaration as a fan of Scream, and as a fan of literature, and as a fan of Sydney and Gale, and like everything, and a fan of Wes Craven. Like, I just, Josh Carr, he said the other day that Wes Craven had his isms, Radio Silence has their isms, Kevin Williamson will have his isms, and you have your isms about Scream. And like, it really comes through in these three scripts, just how much you understand Scream in such a remarkable way. And I have to say, though, this script, it is the most Joey Vallese script. It's very Joey coded. Like, they're, young kids, wine moms, everything is kind of like bougie gay, and like also daring. Like, for instance, like there's the scene in the library with Grace. You kind of go there, you kind of shock us.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of like, it's very gay, right? I mean, you have like the gay couple at the beginning with Ariana Grande, right? Bo and Yang too, come on. And then like then you have Jamie Lee Curtis and Alfie Woodard playing a lesbian couple, and then of course the arc with what we're going to be calling Arthur and Max the Twinks, just because colloquially it's easier for us to kind of like group them together, because in my mind, like I it's hard for me to kind of separate them, and I hope it didn't like come across like I was playing the same character with both of them in the performance. But like, I view them almost as one entity in a way that like I don't view any other Scream killers, Ghostface killers, in that way. Like, you really make them true partners, both in love and passion, but also in what their plan is and what their goal is. So
yeah, I mean, and I tried to take care to make sure that nothing felt sensational or like homophobic, or, because we can accidentally veer into those places, whether we mean to or not. And part of it too is that I wanted to make it really clear that though they had sort of misogynistic tendencies as killers, they didn't actually feel that way towards Sadie. And so I wanted to make them very complex psychopaths. And I think that they are. And I think that a lot of that has to do with like this, it's not sort of expressly said, but implicitly, I hope that Arthur and Max have this sort of feedback loop that only goes back into each other, and that it's been happening since they were kids, and that they've been waiting for the moment to do something so terrible. And I think that it's something that I think has been a little bit lost as the sequels progressively go forward in the Scream movies, that we don't have always a good sense of like how much the killers have been sitting with and waiting. Because to me, there is something far scarier about the patience of a killer taking their time to do what they want to do. Even Billy and Stu taking that year, waiting for the anniversary, being patient, right? Waiting years to enact his own version of events and to reveal himself. Jill, waiting, who knows, her whole life to do this, right?
Nancy.
Nancy Loomis. I mean, just, it goes on and on, just sort of this. And I think that as the movies progress, we lose a little bit. Like, it's just like, oh, suddenly somebody's radicalized, somebody's a killer, somebody is. And so I tried really, and, Joel, obviously, in my script, and Christina and Josh in Seven, and then these boys. Like, for me, it is really satisfying to make sure that these motives run deep and that they are rationalized in the minds of these killers. Because you also have to think that if they're going to pull off 2 days of mayhem in the way that they're doing it, it has to be really, and obviously Ross is a killer as well, but, we need to like think that. So for me, the roots have to go really deep for the killers. And I think we've lost a little bit of that. I'm not super assured necessarily that the real Seven is going to give us killers with deep roots. We'll see, I guess. But, I think it's something that has been sort of an afterthought, and I wanted to really make it prominent in all the scripts. And this one, I think, really hammers it home.
Can I just say,
yeah,
I feel as though Scream 7, as long as it's better than 5 and 6, and it could, if it matches 4 or comes in under 4 for me, it doesn't have to be the original trilogy.
No.
Because with these 3 scripts, and maybe I'm just riding the high and the emotions right now of this script, but like these 3 scripts and kind of living the past of like 7 and Screams, you fulfilled what we needed as fans to feel like the Wes Craven vision is fulfilled with these 3 scripts, but especially this one. Whereas Scream 7 can come along, do its thing, and I think at least I will be okay if it's not the original trilogy. So thank you for that.
I don't think it will be the original trilogy because they're not going to ignore what happened in between. But I do think that there's going to be a fingerprint of the original trilogy that Kevin is the only one who can really provide because of his origin. And I think in some ways it might feel a little bit jarring because of all the movies he was not involved with. But I think that I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be. I'm really excited. I actually really love the trailer. The more I watch it, I'm ready for it. I feel like it's got a lot of interesting things that we haven't even sort of gestured towards. But that was part of the fun of doing my own scripts, was that I don't know what it's really going to look like. And like you said in last week's intro, which blew my mind, because obviously I knew it, but it didn't like register. You did all of this in between the release of 6 and now the release of 7, which is wild to me, that this whole new trilogy sort of that we're giving people to listen to and to imagine. And I'm grateful that we're able to do it prior to 7 coming out. This feels like a great, like a moose bouche for people to be into this and then get the actual movie in just 2 months or whatever it is, right?
I don't want to like pat ourselves on the back. I'm patting you on the back. I think that like your scripts and what you wrote over these past 3 years helped keep Scream alive during a really turbulent time, and keep the excitement alive and keep the fandom alive. Like, I know this sounds silly because I'm only my corner of the world is very, 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 very small, but it's true, and I'm so grateful for everything that you've done. And like the fun thing here with this script is like, there was a time after Nev Campbell and Kevin were announced, right? And then like, or let's just back it up even further, when we didn't even know Nev was coming back, or then we knew. And then it was like, well, what could the story be? And a lot of us assumed, because of the way that Scream 5 kind of led us to believe, about the kids being very little, and Radio Silence forced it into the universe that it was definitely Mark Kincaid, so we had very strong ideas about what it could be. And like, I think this script reflects the conversations we had in the year of 2024 before Isabel May was announced. And it was kind of announced that like, oh, it's going to be about Sydney and her teenage daughter. Here, this is the story that we were thinking we were going to get, in a way, of her having 2 little girls married to Mark Kincaid. And it's very unexpected. Like the fact that like I don't think that this is a Mark movie. I think that he's very much in the back seat for a lot of it, because he has committed this sin against Sydney and put the family in such conflict. It doesn't feel like a Mark movie in the same way that it feels like a Sydney movie, a Gail movie, a Sadie movie, or even a Grace and Ella movie. And I think, but at the same time, I don't know how you could have done Mark Kincaid without it being generic. I think that this was actually a really good use of everything we know about him. I just want to like start out here. Basically, at least this is my interpretation, okay, is that what Joey was doing here is he says rebirth in the script. And I respect your term, and I respect your vision, and I respect your words. The way I view it is almost like it's more of a prequel. It's like the end and the beginning meeting. And a lot of what we see in this is not only Scream 1996, but Scream 1995. This is the Maureen Prescott story. Ironically, Sharon Stone. We have the joke in the original film. Sharon equals Maureen, and Ross, the husband, he is Roman. He's the mastermind who kind of helps the 2 twinks who are in love with each other, Billy and Stu, aka Arthur and Max, set this into motion. And Sadie is obviously the Sydney, right? But everything we see with Sharon and Sadie, that in the finale, and like the reaction to the affair and the affair itself, like that is stuff that we never got to see as Scream 1996 fans, and we get to live it with the script, and more importantly, Sydney gets to live it. So that is like the point of the finale and what we were building towards. Like that's the whole gist. But I just want to like take this next moment, and then I'm going to pass it to you. I kept returning to this as I was like recording it, but more so when I was listening back. Like I just felt like the word I kept returning to over and over again is, this feels like an eclipse of the beginning and the end. And it's weird because it's a dominant script and a recessive script. There are like the characters are still moving forward, but there's still something spiritual about it. Feels like we're in the prequel era. We're in the beginning. It lives in this weird space where it's both and neither at the same time. And it's just, again, it's very spiritual. And it's like a lot of like the emotions of Maureen's story and the original problems Sydney had in Scream 1, Billy, and her intimacy and like her trust. All of that comes back to the surface. So you have all of that you're playing with in this new context, but also you have like little motifs. We call them Easter eggs in the Radio Silence era, but they don't feel obnoxious this time. They feel natural. They feel, again, spiritual. They feel like there's a point to them that tie back to Scream 1996, whether it's like the news reporter running up to Gail and Sydney when they're going into the school, or Grace in the bathroom, or like Sydney's, like whenever she and Mark are arguing, like it's so Billy and Sydney coded in the hallway where her mouth is just hanging open. Like that's how I see the script. It's an eclipse of the beginning and the end. And that's kind of a beautiful way to really round out Sydney in a way.
I mean, I love that metaphor of the eclipse. I think that it is very fitting, especially the way you've contextualized it. And yeah, I mean, for me, something that I think has been true for a while in the movies, and I'll even say that it sort of progressively has happened from 2 on. Like, I think it's just a natural thing that happens. I think it's actually a big criticism that people have of the franchise going forward, because Scream by its nature is a meta series. It's commenting on movies, on the real world, but it is a movie itself. It's commenting on horror, but it is a horror movie itself. And for me, each movie in its own way, particularly the first 3 films, is embodying the thing it is commenting on. So the movie itself is textured like and plays out like the type of movie or genre that it's kind of lampooning in a lot of ways. And I think as time goes on, the movies are less able to sustain that energy, right? So 4, much as I love it, 4, because of all the disruptions to the process of it being made, doesn't really come into the movie that it's meant to be until the end when Jill reveals herself. But the movie that precedes it does not actually really satisfy the requirements of what she's describing. So it goes into high gear, and she's maybe my favorite of all the killers. And I love her motive, but the movie that precedes her reveal doesn't quite live up to it for me. 5 talks requel, but not much about it feels like it's actually living. They just say we are a requel, but it doesn't feel like a requel, right? And 6, I don't even know what 6 was trying to do. 6 had said that it was an action movie, then maybe okay, but it doesn't, for me, sound like it feels so far away from that thing that I'm talking about. And that's separate of whether or not you enjoy 6 or not. 6 does not actually embody anything it's commenting on. It just doesn't. And so it's like a movie of Easter eggs, I guess, but like that is not a commentary on anything. So for me, it was really important that each of these scripts feel like the thing that they are talking about. So what you're referring to is that the story is meta. The story, the things that occur are these echoes of what has occurred before. And some of that is on purpose, orchestrated by the evil twinks. And some of it is just sort of happenstance. And some of it is just like the cyclical nature of one's life and one's place in the world. And then part of it is just me under the surface emulating things that have happened before, because that is what we want. We want to sort of be fed comfort food, but we also want it to then be subversive and surprise us. So I don't think there's much that occurs that is just a direct rip of anything before it. It tends to like go in a slightly different direction, but it's all part of the fabric that's being woven. And I will say, in terms of the Maureen/Sharon of it all, yeah, like obviously that was very conscious in my mind that we are restarting, because I have very famously said, I was wrong and I was hoping that I was going to be right. But before 5 came out, I was like, oh, I really, really hope what they're doing is they're going to have Christina Carpenter murdered and Tara find her, and that's why Sam comes back to town, and we have a restart of the Maureen Prescott. And I kind of don't know why that wasn't a thought, but that she still could have been Billy's daughter. That could have been a third act surprise. It could have been like, they still could have done it, but they didn't. Instead, they just did a sort of watered down, updated version of the Drew Barrymore scene. And to me, that was pleasurable in its own way, but also felt sort of lacked courage in my mind. And maybe they thought, well, we don't want to keep coming back to Maureen Prescott. We're really like handing this off to, but to me, that would have gotten Sydney's attention more than anything, to be like, holy shit, somebody murdered this woman. Her daughter found her. This happened in Woodsboro. This is what happened to me and my mother. To me, that would have been more of a Nancy Thompson going back to the Dream Warriors kind of thing, right? Like to me, it would have felt more of an investment from Sydney. Obviously, the death of Dewey, fine, that makes sense. But to me, it would have like alarmed Sydney on this sort of spiritual level. And so to have Sydney realize what's going on in the finale of the final Scream and witness a sort of recreation of her mother's murder in front of a version of her, Sydney Sadie, Sharon Maureen, to watch it happen, this sort of accelerated remake in some ways. But to them, it's not a remake, it's a rebirth, because they're trying to gift this iconography to Sadie and to themselves themselves, which is really twisted. And to have Sydney there to like witness the end of her story and the beginning of another, it's a special kind of torment because they want to kill her, and they want her to witness what they're going to do. And so it's a sort of, there's a convoluted quality to it, but I think that's Sydney is our logical eye watching their convoluted, look at this crazy plan that we have, but it makes sense, but it's just complicated. But for her, it's clarifying, right? And it's, yeah.
So there's so much to dive in here.
A lot to unpack, I know.
But, I just want to talk about, you brought up Sharon's death. And like, it's a beautiful place to start because like, I think that like, because you actually asked me as I was finishing up the recordings, you're like, well, what do you think is the best death in the film? And I said that Sharon, I mean, like, it's not even close for me, to be honest. Like, I think my favorite sequence by far is the Mark attack that leads into Sydney's little chase and like their phone calls, and then the Gale scene and the climaxing with Alfie and Jamie Lee being revealed as fake ghost faces. And
yeah,
that to me is like your chef's kiss. Like that is such an amazing use of all of the survivors, amazing phone calls, like a great action, emotion. Like it's so special and like it's so skilled at what you do as a writer. And like, comparably, like in the Scream 7 script, like that was like the same, like structurally, that was like the Meeks attack. So when I look at these two side by side, it's just like what you accomplish here with the Mark and the Sydney and the Gale is so much grander and so much more specific and just so much more like mind blowing in some ways. Than like, that was for me. Whenever I was reading, that was the turning point where something changed, something shifted in me, and when I was doing it, it was just so good. So that there's that part of the script, but like the best death I think is by far Sharon. I mean, had Mark died, maybe it would have been the sequence, but like I
sure thought about killing him.
Whenever Sharon died, Joey, I was so disturbed by reading how you describe.
Fucked up. Yeah.
Like Sydney being there, Sadie watching under duct tape, sobbing, crying, but Sharon mouthing "I love you" to her, while they're both in the Ghostface costume. What it means, like the meaning of it, but also just the disturbing like violence of it. It's so awful. The dynamics. It's just like I literally had to like kind of stop and get up and do something else after I read that sequence until Sydney and Sadie go into her bedroom. Like there was just something especially disturbing, and it's just like, yes, that's what we want. If we're going to show what Maureen Prescott's death was like, you achieved that. That is like that moment, that death is worthy of a 9-film story. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I, had Liv Tyler in my mind the whole time I was writing it. And it was I love Liv Tyler. I'm such a 90s kid. And like,
you didn't even give me an option. You're like, this is going to be a character and she's going to be played by Liv Tyler.
Liv Tyler. Like, yeah. She represents that era to me in so many ways. And in some ways an homage to her being stabbed in the chair in The Strangers and, that sort of brutal sequence. But the brutality of it, there was a version of it as I was writing where Sharon is killed in the second act. And then I realized that it would give the game away a little too quickly if she died that early. And then it kicked into this, like, it would have really changed how everybody behaved and what happened. So when I came up with this idea that her death sort of is at the top of the third act into the finale, it changed everything because it suddenly was like, oh, okay, not only are they going to do this, but they want Sydney to see it. And they need Sydney to see it. In their minds, they need her to witness, they need her to watch this new origin story that they're foisting on somebody else, and not to sort of blame Sydney because they revere her in some ways, but for her to like have to endure this pain twice. Like, they are fucked up. Those demon twinks are evil, and they don't think they are. And Ross is evil as well, but in a slightly more rational way because he sees it as an opportunity to let these sort of crazy twinks take the fall and do all of this horrible stuff, but also his delusion that his daughter would be okay with it, and like, because he also, I think, thinks that by them being in on it, it will inoculate them somehow from future Ghostface, which doesn't make any sense either, right? Like, she's like, what do you mean? Like, you've killed my mother and you fucked me over because now all these people are going to want to do what has happened to Sydney. They don't want to do it to me now. And this sort of misguided sense that people can control the story by making themselves the star of the story, whereas Sydney did not want any of this. And Sydney was, bequeathed this trauma and this survivor status against her will, And so I think that that's a big piece of it. And I also wanted sort of Sadie to stand in for the possibility of what could happen with Ella and Grace as they get older. So I didn't want to go there with this, with two young girls, and I didn't want to do a time jump to give us the teenage daughters. And, you know, I just didn't want to do any of that. I wanted it to feel like they mattered to the story, but to have Sadie be this like avatar for that kind of developed over time. I knew that she would be important, but I also wanted to trick everybody. And I wanted you to wonder, is she another Jill? Is she a killer? So I wanted people to be tricked and think that I was going to like recycle something. And I did recycle something, but it's not what they thought I was going to recycle, right?
There's no way anyone could predict based on the marketing that I've done, based on like the description in your teasing and like previous episodes. There's no way anybody could predict what this script would have done. Even down to like Sydney's character arc. Maybe they could predict what Gail would do and how she's like the aunt and the daddy in some ways. But like in terms of the arc of the film and Sharon and Maureen, like there's just no way. One of my favorite lines to do in the finale was when Sydney interrupts the flow. Sydney is, she's not really saying much, but she's still very active. She's more active in the finale than Sadie, even though it's all about Sadie in a way. One of my favorite moments is when she says, and your daughter didn't have to watch, and to Ross, and then Ross snaps at her and says, "Who the fuck are you?" Like that was one of my favorite things. So like, if you listen back now, you'll be like, "Oh, Ryan really enjoyed that line." I also just really enjoyed doing the twinks. I didn't know if that was something I discovered in the moment. Like whenever I was preparing to do Christina Carpenter, I was like, I was game, man. Whenever I was doing Marianne and like her line about to Vera's daughter and called her the little cunt, I loved it. But whenever I was doing the twinks, it was so fun. Like talking about Sharon and the revelation that she was sleeping with Ariana Grande. Like, Jesus, fuck, that woman was a freak. Like that is hysterical. And like, the other line that I really enjoyed was I'm gonna FaceTime your kids and make them watch me slit your throat or something. Like it's I have to say, I think this is like probably equivalent to, if not more disturbing than Jill mutilating herself, is seeing the twinks' passion for each other, like their deep love and their deep genuine love for each other, but how disturbing it is. And like their demise, of course. I remember the day you told me about their demise, and I was shaken by it in terms of them killing each other. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, a few things. First, that I I had hoped that 5, when there was that very obvious Mikey Madison on fire in the trailer, I had hoped that we were having our first self-immolating Ghostface. I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. They're going to revere Sydney so much that they're going to want to die. And that's, of course, not what happened at all. But, and in fact, their treatment of Sydney is one of the things that makes the least sense to me of 5, that you could be a stab diehard and have Sydney Prescott in front of you and just kind of stab her and, dismiss her. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I wanted to capture. So in some ways, my scripts are all like my own disappointments that I get to develop into things that I want to see on screen. And so for me, having the twinks kill each other in front of Sydney and Sadie to sort of really sacrifice themselves to their ideal. I mean, and this is not so unusual. I mean, fucking mass shooters shoot themselves all the time. They do this horrible thing and then they kill themselves. And some say it's out of cowardice, but in some ways, I think it is a fucked up one final fuck you. I'm going to control my fate. I controlled your fate and I will control mine now, right? And I think that they are doing that to some degree. And also, of course, I'm sure it's not lost on anybody. And Josh Carr, sent me a message about this, but I'm taking the subtext, the queer subtext and the queer coding of Billy and Stu, and I'm making it text. So in that way, that is another way that you embody this new version of it. You just actually make them gay. And it's not just they're just gay and that's it, but certainly people can be gay and be terrible, and that's not sort of exclusive to any one demographic. But I wanted it to be complicated. I wanted it to feel rich. I wanted it to also feel like I think that Gail says as much when she's doing her little monologue about the previous killers. Simple Stu along for the ride. I think that Billy is really driving everything that happens in Scream, and Stu is just excited to do it with him, right? He has that hilarious, the things that make the finale of, and you just had a brilliant episode about the finale of the original Scream, but the Matthew Lillard performance of succumbing to peer pressure on the phone and my mom and dad are gonna be so mad at me. Like, it's so iconic because it's him saying, "Oh, I just thought it was doing," you know what I mean? Like, I thought it was fun, like, like, and I didn't want that for Max and Arthur. I wanted Max and Arthur to be really, we don't know much about their dads or what happened. We know that they both killed each other's mothers, because we have that sort of mother subtext. We have the, which started with Gail in my 7 script thinking that she was being called mother like a motherfucker and not knowing that they were calling her mother, in this sort of queer culture Gen Z way. But these boys are film buffs, and they are like saying like, we are death to the other mother. Well, who's the other mother? Sadie's mother, Sharon, and Sydney is the mother, and death to these mothers. And so there is this like double entendre and film reference and cultural reference. And so I sort of feel like my hope is that people see that there's so much going on, because I really did make everything quite layered. I wanted it to feel like something that you have to listen to, like a good novel. You have to go back and stop and say, this is a really purposeful thing. Now I don't want to be a pretentious prick the way Sydney says that Artie and Max are being pretentious and that moment, which is a great diffusion. And I just imagined her watching them at that table, just like, oh my God, like these two are uniquely crazy. And Sydney uses their unique psychosis against them, to get the upper hand in some way. But Sydney can't do it by herself either. And we again pay homage to the first film where Gail Weathers creeps in and helps to save the day. In this case, she very much saves the day, but that's after a film where she's doubting herself so much, and it's subtle, but she's doubting herself and her role and who she is to Sydney and her daughters, and her, Gail has a very interior story in a lot of ways, which I really love.
In terms of Sharon, I feel like what you did, and sometimes, and I don't know if this is just me and my Maureen Prescott rotted brain, I'm just being completely obsessed with her and her story, but I feel like I got to meet her, and I feel like I got to hear her, and I feel like, and it's just so interesting that Sydney I feel like she and Sydney were close in life before she died.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I feel like that's why it's almost like it's so cool that you made them best friends. And it's so interesting, too, that the betrayal comes in that form for Sydney, and like how complicated she is. Like, I actually think that she is a good, empathetic person underneath her flaws and her whatever she's working through with having so many affairs. But there's one line that you wrote, and it made me feel like you understand her and her situation so intently. Sharon, after Sadie runs out of the house, after Principal Lee, Sharon, you write Sharon, exhausted with herself. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I felt that. I was like, yes, that is so how Sharon / Maureen would feel in this moment. And I just feel like we get to see Maureen play out in real time with Sharon. And I, and even so, like, I don't think like Sharon is as memorable as the Twinks or even Ross in some respects, but because she is Maureen, she is magnificent and she is completely iconic. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many good-hearted people who are so self-destructive, and I think that Sharon is self-destructive. And, Mark, we go back to Mark and his role, and obviously his indiscretion, his betrayal of Sydney is the thrust of the film, but also, when Sydney is saying to her father in Scream 3, what if she'd never done this, right? Maybe none of this would have happened. It's all because of her. Like, Sydney has that moment of saying, and Neil doesn't sugarcoat. He doesn't say, hey, don't say that. He just sort of listens to her and understands that she's carrying this burden of like, what if, right? She's haunted by the what if. And I think that Sharon and Mark, and I want to make very clear that I don't actually agree with Mark's anger at Sydney and his like, well, I fucked your friend because you kept running off and stressing me out and almost got yourself killed a bunch of times. Like, no, sorry, sir. No. You still cheated on Sydney Prescott. However, I also have to acknowledge, and it's something I wanted to get at, and I didn't hammer it home too hard because I wanted to sort of feel earned over the first, like all 3 scripts to some degree, how it's not easy to be married to Sydney Prescott. It's not easy to be the daughter of Sidney Prescott. It's not easy to be Sidney Prescott. And I didn't want to make it seem like Sidney is, not perfect. She's not embarrassing everybody. I mean, sometimes your desire to do good can be harmful to those around you. And I think Sidney she does have a bit of a hero complex. I think he's not wrong when he says that, because the one time she sat it out was New York. Gail almost died, and she has that exchange with Mark in 7 when they're getting ready to go to the safe house, and she doesn't go. She goes to Woodsboro, and she says to him, she hints like, I wasn't there, and Gail almost got killed. And so Sidney cannot just sit and watch these things happen. It's just not in her nature. And
well, just to defend Mark, because like I'm 100% on Sydney's side, and I think what you do with her is so beautiful and devastating and something, again, unexpected. I think like based on like how I think I even teased it in the episode with Josh Carr. I said something about how by the beginning of Act 2, Sydney is in her apex gloomy girl era and Gail is in her apex sassy girl era. And everyone probably thought, oh, Mark died in Act 1. No. Something else happened that really completely unravels her. And that was such a brilliant choice. But like, one thing that you kind of did with Mark is by him saying this and feeling this way, it kind of reminds me of Scream 1 in terms of Sydney being so sure that Cotton Weary is the one who murdered her mother, being almost delusional about it and being I think like it's the same kind of delusion that she's kind of in, where she doesn't recognize what this was doing to her relationship and her marriage, and so I mean, again, Mark was totally in the wrong. I'm totally on Sydney's side, but I can understand Mark's perspective and his 2 cents, and I think that's the brilliance of your writing. And I love that you had an exclamation of how awful you think what he did was, because in the script it comes off as very human and very empathetic and relatable. So meanwhile, the whole story is built around this character arc of Sydney.
Well, and just Mark, as strongly as I feel, I don't think that she should have left him, and I don't think he should have died. And that's why I didn't kill him, right? And it is ambiguous at the end because he's not there. She's alone with her daughters and she's outside in that final moment. But we know he survived. We know that she's there. We don't know if like their marriage is necessarily going to survive beyond this. But she, in that moment, I think if he wasn't in a coma, I don't know how she would have spoken to him, but I think that she was using that time to like encourage him to survive, and that's what mattered. But also, Sydney she gets a call from the killer, and she's like, I know I said I wasn't going to go, but I got to go now. You know what I mean? Like, I have no choice, right? Because that is who she is. And I think that it's okay to view that element of Sydney as flawed, maybe even foolish, but I think it's okay. And I think it's realistic, right?
Well, but see, the thing that I see and because this will be controversial, because Joey told me, so listeners, for perspective, the final Scream and the origins of it really began, he kind of surprised me with a draft of the opening with Ariana. I don't think we were envisioning her at that moment, but it was a draft where the action wasn't so heavy and Ghostface didn't talk to Kayla one-on-one. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of like the guy falls out of the closet and there's a little bit of action, that the parents come home. There was that opening. The first draft of the opening came in June of 24. And also at that moment was Joey knew that he wanted to do 90s thrillers and that Mark was going to cheat on Sydney and that there would be this affair. It devastated me. It hurts. And I think that people aren't really prepared for this. I think you're going to get a lot of messages saying how hurt they were that Mark did this. But that's the whole point. You do this to really bring something new out in Sydney. And the way I see Sydney's character arc is, she says it as much, literally. And you give us there's this beautiful thing about when you put Sydney and Mark Kincaid together, the conversations that they have, all of those scenes in this script are they're as rich as the scene in Scream 3 that I adore in the police station. There's something so, we may get Mark Evans and he may be fantastic, but there is something really truly special about these two characters and the way that they relate to each other and talk to each other. But what I see you doing here is it's something that there's a difference between literally surviving and being badass and girl boss, and there's there's that, but the thing that sets Sydney apart is the trust aspect and the personal relationships. And what she has done over these, since Scream 3 to now, is she has built a life for herself where she is emotionally available to the other people in her life.
Yeah.
And what you do is you take that away from her in this, by Mark and by her husband and her best friend betraying her so deeply, you tear that away. So it's almost like she does revert almost in a way back to the Sydney of Scream 1, the Sydney who had the same kind of frustrations and complicated relationships with Billy, where he was pressuring her in ways that like she didn't really, in a way, the way I see it is you tear her down so that she can be reborn in a way and emerge stronger, but she's still good. The reason she doesn't leave Mark whenever he's in a coma in the hospital is because of her goodness, and she sees the bigger picture. And that's what I find so beautiful about her. Like, she's reborn from all of this, it's like, you take that, all that development that's been happening over the last 9 years, you take that away from her, and yet she still emerges. And that's what's beautiful about this version of Sydney.
I agree, and I appreciate that. I also think it's funny and says a lot that it would have felt less upsetting to people if I just murdered Mark than Mark cheating on Sydney Prescott, right? Like, so like, and that says a lot about sort of our like moralistic core that we sort of have as a society about what is worthy of disdain and what is, kill as many people as you want on screen, but don't kill a dog, like
Right.
Our sense of like ethics and morals and what hurts and what doesn't are very confused when it comes to the horror genre, I find. But yeah, no, I think you said it beautifully. It had to be complicated. It had to rock Sydney's core, and it couldn't just be a neighbor was murdered next, because then they would just get the fuck out of town. There'd be no movie, there'd be no script if there was not a more complicated human drama at the heart of it. And then, of course, that indiscretion is at the heart of the reveal of the killers and the motive. But, like concurrent with this other story that the Twinks have put in their minds and like what they've orchestrated. So it's very, again, I worked hard to balance a lot of, nothing was competing because they were all in service of getting to the same place, but I really had to carefully layer this narrative and these themes and what was happening. And for me, I'm such a stickler for realism and logic, and that's another thing that the movies have really let go of over the years. And I care a lot about things making sense and feeling like they could really occur. And to me, there's nothing more common than infidelity. There's nothing more sort of wrenching and testing of a relationship than this happening to a couple. To have Sydney Prescott, she can't be superhuman special and also avoid the regular pitfalls of life,
Well, and you do everything you just said. I completely felt, and like also I do need to just, again, I said it in the last episode, but I have to plug your logic and thoughtfulness. Like Sydney doesn't even realize that Ghostface is back in a real way until like it's like 1 hour and 42 minutes of a 3-hour script. So I mean, like it's almost through the second act until she gets her first phone call. So the logic sound, but like what you just said, it's almost like the Buffy of it all, right? It's taking you give her someone who is a superhuman in a way, a superhero, of Final Girls, of Sydney Prescott. She's lived through this, 8 times now. And yet you give her something that is you humanize her by giving her this to deal with as like, something that rocks her. She is still a person underneath, being able to go into the finale and shoot doors, she is, this is the perfect way to unravel her and break her down in an every woman, every man kind of a way. Sydney Prescott, the celebrity, I mean, you really emphasize the celebrity, the money, the wealth, and the way that people look up to her. Underneath all of that, she is still, a human being. And I think that this is such a beautiful way to explore her and to really get something new and to bring her down. And like also you can't do the Scream 3 arc every time there is an ending, you know what I mean? And this is something different. This is something cerebral and meditative, but there's still a massive change. There's like, I see it as Sydney shedding skin and she's somebody different now,
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that every life experience, every milestone and every trauma and every hurt change us, right? So for better and for worse, we change all the time. And we can't just have the same exact steadfast Sydney Prescott all the time. It's something that, I think it's something that has really appreciated in value over time. And much of it is your hard work. But I think that people see that Scream 3 is such a special Sydney showcase because we see a scared Sydney. We see a deeply traumatized, like in her shell, hiding, almost agoraphobic claustrophobic, who has to force herself out of hiding, who has to confront all these mysteries, who has to learn all these things that were not true that she thought were true. And that's been happening to her across all of the movies. I'm a big defender of our Scream 4 Sidney Prescott because I love how lived in and like she's so balanced and she's in control. And then it's like, fuck, even though I've decided for myself that I am in control, these horrible things are following me, and she springs into action in a very organic way. And so I think that, yeah, if you're not changing, you're not living. And I think that she's a mother of these children who are, Ella is really funny and spunky, and Grace is hinting at a bit of darkness, or not in a Sam Carpenter darkness, but like a becoming older and aware of who her mother is. And it was really important for me to have that thread of Grace at school, dealing with the bully, dealing with people who everybody knows who her mother is. And I think that, and I don't know to what degree the real Seven is going to do that, but my Sydney is famous. My Sydney is part of the culture still. My Sydney has had to figure out how to live among people in a way that both is disarming and protective,
Yeah.
And Gail, of course, is Gail. And so it's really satisfying to me, especially to have Gail come to the party, have everybody sort of fawning over her, we're jumping around, but listener, I don't think I've ever enjoyed or wanted to see anything filmed more than Gail clearing out the party and threatening everybody on the porch that she would resurrect every sin they've ever committed, like Jason fucking Voorhees, and then her kissing Callie on the head and saying goodnight, everybody, and slamming the door. Like I was laughing while I was writing it, and I was like, this is so good. This is so good. I want this. I want this. This is Gail. This is Gail. Like, this is all to say I take great pride in crafting the world that you see in the final Scream. And I wanted the girls to have that through line. I wanted Gail to feel like, in some ways, it's not being said, but she's Aunt Gail in part because even though she was ultimately she was right in the original Scream, she was right about Cotton, she was right, but Sydney was collateral damage in Gail proving her point. And Gail, I think, as their relationship develops, consistently and progressively atones for that with Sydney. We get a little bit of it in the real 5 when she is like, if I'd never written that book, if I'd never done this, and Gail and Sydney is like, stop, that's not true. You didn't murder anybody. That's not you, right? But I appreciated that suggestion of Gail feeling that way in 5 being articulated, because it did help me to continue that and carry that gauntlet going forward with her. Whereas if they never did it, it might feel less naturalistic to give her that connection to Sydney going forward, right?
Well, I do think Gail is the MVP, and to kind of do a pinpoint on what you said about Gail, she is, she and Sydney they were there at the beginning with Maureen, and they're here now. And I think the glorious thing you do with Gail is because Gail often gets blamed for starting this, for prolonging this, for promoting the Ghostface culture. She gets to be the one to come full circle and put an end to it by decapitating Ross. First of all, we love the decapitation. Never been done before. I've wanted one. I'm an H2O guy. I've wanted this. So thank you. But thank you for the heads up. But like, I think it's just so, it's just, there's something about Gail. I mean, Sydney and Gail, but also Gail, you literally have her graduating here. You know what I mean? She graduates and then she puts an end to it. So that creates this circle, where it's beautiful.
I hadn't thought about that with the introduction to her, like, as a graduate. I love that intro to her too. I think it might be my favorite. I love that she's getting this honorary doctorate and that there are protesters in the crowd and there are people who love her. And then she has that fun moment with 2 girls who give their underwear to the younger student to hold their space in line. Yeah, it was important for me too to feel like we really got closure with Gail too. And I love that the ending, she's deleting all the voice memos from everybody who wants her. And Sydney says they'll keep calling, and she says, I'll keep deleting. And Sydney kind of smirks, like, because she doesn't believe her, you know? And that's not a deal breaker in their friendship. If she does like fall off of her word, Sydney is not going to fault her for it. Sydney understands. And I think that evolution is important too, right? I don't know. I also agree. I love writing Gail. It feels like talk about a real pleasure, because not only Gail, but writing Courtney Cox as Gail. Like, it's important to keep in mind that I'm imagining her in this like idealized form. And it's because Sydney and Gail are, I don't want to say easy to write, but they're pleasurable to write because they are so fully formed. Nev Campbell and Courtney Cox have just done this like unusually consistent, you know, even the flaws of 6 and the way Gail is sort of miswritten in a lot of ways. Courtney Cox doesn't miss a beat in embodying the version that's given to her, right? So even though I don't necessarily agree with everything about what's given to her in 6, Courtney Cox is embodying and delivering. So imagining what Courtney could do with my version of Gail Weathers was really fuel to write this version of her that is so, and I think I'm going to assume that it's among some of, you know, not just the porch scene, but I'm going to assume that people by and large are going to love the Aunt Gail of it. They're going to love that she's with her daughters. They're going to love her just slouched down on the couch, ignoring the adults and like giving her jewelry to the kids. And like, you know what I mean? Like, there's something about Gail. And then of course, Gail kills Alice with fucking Dewey's badge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that does so much. That whole sequence is just
they're so interlocked, and like, you know, Gail is, I mean, for until like Act 3, I mean, she's really like a co-lead here with Sydney. Like, it's like the Scream 3 structure. We get a Sydney scene, a Gail scene, a Sydney scene, a Gail scene, and then they're together. But you know, it's impossible for me to think, even though this is a Sydney script, and I think she's fantastic. You know, I think it's such a great exploration of her. It's gonna be hard for me to believe that people will walk away not thinking that Gail is the MVP, because every scene that she has is so funny. It's so impactful. Like, literally, there were so many times I was recording this script where I would be in the Gail Weathers spirit doing her lines. I literally giggled right after I said it, and I had to stop and redo it because like it just like it cut into the flow, and it's just so funny. I mean, just like, Joey, this version of Gail, I mean, this could even be the best version of Gail ever, like topping Scream 2, Scream 4. I mean, like, you know, hilarious one-liners, but still cutting edge, like in rough in the way that Gail is. But like, we see her at the crime scene, and you get to recreate the version of the Scream 4 scene that we never got in the real movie. You subtly put in how she was canceled after the events of Screams, which was Marianne wanted, that was her end goal, and she got it, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
And then like you said, the Aunt Gail with the girls, like, you know, characterizing her in that way, and like bringing out that part of her that you know is there, that I know is there in the Gail Weathers that we probably will never really get to see. Her beautiful relationship with Sydney, like, it's just, you know, but also the carry through of Dewey. There's so much here that I just, it's kind of overwhelming. And, you know, you referenced Gail killing Alice in her attack, when, you know, this is intentional on Gail's part, but it was an accident. The lesbians, you know, were just trying to scare everybody out of town.
Right.
Because then after this, we see Gail, before she kills Ross and has the nice epilogue with Sydney, you know, we see Gail at home while Sydney's away, and she's wrestling with her thoughts and her mind. And this is after Gail has accidentally killed an innocent person in Scream 7. So there's a motif of like...
Yes.
This is the
that
second
repeating
time,
of, yeah.
So this is the second time Gail's killed an innocent, for lack of a better phrase. And like, we get to see Dewey, and Dewey's there to defend her. And it's a beautiful moment. She ends the scene just crying, frustrated with herself. And like, literally, I'm crying just thinking about it right now. But where do you think that leaves Gail? What does that tell us, that Gail kills Alice, and then her reaction to it? What is the arc of that you want people to understand?
Well, Gail, I think that Gail she's struggling with, I feel like it's less about her struggling with making the mistake, because in both cases, it's not her fault, right? Josh has told those boys that, you know, so they won't get in trouble for putting on the Ghostface costume prior. He makes them wear it again to scare, you know, they think they're just scaring them, but, and Gail shoots one of them. It's not her fault, technically. And it's not her fault that she kills Alice, because for all intents and purposes, they're attacking, right? She doesn't know that this is not real. And so she, I think, feels a bit frustrated that she is in on the action to a degree, but it's not productive. Like killing this like older lesbian who has not actually killed anybody, but is, like a prank gone wrong, essentially, which is crazy. But it's like she's just in that moment, she's feeling unproductive. She's feeling like destructive. Like I'm here, but I haven't done shit. And Dewey's like, no, don't say that. That's my best friend you're talking about. Like you are helping. You're here. And so to have Gail sort of alone, the girls are upstairs sleeping, the cops are outside, and she's just sort of there alone with the aftermath of what she's done. I actually don't think she feels regret or remorse. I think she's beyond that. I think she is post remorse. She is evolved in this, like, I have to help get this fucker. We have to make sure that this ends. And she's frustrated, I think, if anything. So in that way, Gail maintains this really sharp, no apologies, like, aspect to her personality that I think is very realistic to her. Like, when she says to Dewey that she feels bad that Randy has gotten killed in part 2, she feels bad because she is at her most opportunistic, her most exploitative, that is the thing that changes her. And going forward, she still honors that version of herself. Gail doesn't want people to die progressively. She wants to be able to be involved in this legacy and this iconography that she helped create, but she doesn't want people to die in order for it to happen, right? So I think that she's really complicated, and I hope that comes across, that she didn't want to kill this woman, but she really had no choice. She's defending Sydney. She's defending, I think in her mind, when she runs out of that panic room, it's like, I cannot leave these kids parentless. Like, they cannot lose both their parents right now. So she is running to Sydney when Alice and Janet come up the stairs in their Ghostface costumes, and she's like, oh, fuck you. And she runs the other way, right? Like, she is going to get her gun. She's going to, right? Like, so Gail is, I think, the adrenaline and she has made peace with the version of what is right and what she has to do. And I think that she doesn't err from that. But the aftermath of Alice is like frustration. I think she's more frustrated that she had to kill this woman and that it doesn't actually matter. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I think she might deal with it in therapy later, but I think that the Gail of the moment is so laser focused on the protection of Sydney and her kids that it is more agonizing over the fact that she was forced to do this rather than what she actually did. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's a really,
And like, it's part of
she's almost like a cop or something who like knows that they are in, like, they have to serve and protect, and they might make mistakes sometimes, but it doesn't change their mission.
And doesn't it like also speak to like the dominant recessive overlap that I've been talking about with the eclipse, right? Is like, she's feeling like, what good was this done? Like, this was so not productive. Like, what am I doing? I think that's part of like the exhaustion with Gail in that moment too. And the aspect that you mentioned that's subtle in the script is she's feeling a little less confident because she has been canceled. Her show was literally canceled, and she doesn't have the standing that she once did in post Screams. And I think that plays into this whole arc as well, and ending with that beautiful thing with them on the porch. And by the way, that sentence of them with the mugs before they start talking, that was the last thing that I recorded for the script. So in a way, it feels so fitting, right? Yeah, that was what I ended with. But the whole thing too, there's a really funny thing you do with Gail here as it pertains to Gail and Sydney, is like you kind of butt Mark out of the way and let Gail be the daddy of the family. She is the father figure with the girls, but
there
also
is competition
with
there. Yeah, there is some competition that's subtle, I think. Although I think I name it pretty explicitly because I want people to hear it. But there is a bit of that. And there was a version of it, again, in my mind where it was much more overt and more tension. There's also a version where I was going to have Gail confess to infidelity with Dewey to sort of like calm Sydney. But I decided I didn't want to do that. Like it sort of had this other layer, and I, and the surprise of it would have been that he cheated with that Dewey was the one who had the affair with Judy. But I was like, that feels a little too fan fiction-y, and like, let's go back in time. So I cut that out of my mind. But yeah, I wanted there to be some tension, even the way Mark talks about Gail when Sydney's on the phone with her, right? Like, what else can't I say? What other words should I shield, her highness from, and like he thinks it's all kind of ridiculous, and Sydney knows that he thinks Gail is kind of ridiculous, right? And to me that just like reinforces both her Gail as celebrity, but also feeling that their relationship is kind of peculiar. He doesn't shit on it, but he comments on them being like a very strange buddy comedy, like the fact that they are still so close and closer still.
And he's jealous. Like that's the funny thing. Like, and it's kind of speaks to the whole thing. Like there is something about the marriage that isn't so secure that Mark even thinks to feel that way, you know, and even something that he shouldn't be jealous about, he gets jealous about. So beautiful. See, this is flawless construction, people.
Well, jealous and insecure, but also guilty. Like, I think he feels like almost a bit like, it's not explicit, it's more like in my mind canon, but I think that he's almost worried that Gail will sniff out that he's been unfaithful or something. You know what I mean? Like, I think that he knows that she's such a bulldog she's just a pit bull when it comes to Sydney, that he is maybe a little bit like on weird footing around her, because he's like, shit, she knows this, and what is she going to find out in the time that she's here, you know? And it's natural that Gail would have the assumption that maybe he was the one sleeping with Kayla based on her sending messages. And he's so like, no, I wasn't sleeping with the fucking nanny. Like, how could you think that, you know? But it makes sense that Gail, after finding this out, would be, you know, a little bit suspicious. And the book club women, you know, that line I love where Debbie Ann's like, haven't you seen any Michael Douglas movies?
Yeah.
Men like Mark, you know,
they're ready to fuck. They're so
that
intense. Yeah.
They need to fuck all the time. Like, and so the idea that like everybody kind of sees it that way and is like kind of not shocked that this happened, you know, is very telling and is embarrassing to Sydney as well. And I think it's okay. It's okay for our Sydney to feel humiliated, you know, because these small humiliations have been part of her entire life. She's not seen by everybody as just a badass survivor. Everything about her mother is embarrassing to her until she makes peace with it. Sydney's been contending with these complicated, embarrassing, judgmental criticisms.
The idea of like everything that happened with Maureen and the Sharon Stone of it all, right? And then for it to follow and now come in the form of her husband and her best friend, like there's something especially sad about that. And again, it's something you're digging into new territory for Sydney, new and old, because Billy cheated on her. We never got to really experience that. And I was kind of hoping that at some point there would be a stray line where Sydney has thought about this, the fact that like, while they were together, Billy was also fucking Christina Carpenter and had a bastard child with her. So there is a full circle moment in ways that like, you know, in ways that like people probably haven't even considered yet. So it's interesting that you bring that out of Sydney, something that should have been explored by Radio Silence in 5 that wasn't. But you know, speaking of the Mark and Sydney of it all, one of my favorite little moments is whenever they're in the kitchen sharing the sandwich and Mark's trolling her. And like, I can just picture Patrick Dempsey playing those lines. Like, it's just like, you have you capture each of not only the characters, but the actors. Like the way that you brought up Courtney Cox earlier, like it's the same thing with Patrick Dempsey and Nev Campbell. Like I can picture Patrick Dempsey smirking these lines about Gail, right? The thing that I love that you did is that not only like, so the first time we see them, they're cuddled in bed, they're, you know, wrapped up in each other, showing happiness, right? And then that gets broken. But also we see them having sex, we see them having passion, unsolicited, unprovoked, like a surprise fuck in the middle of the morning. You know, it's important to show that they do have an active sex life, right? And that there is love between them before you literally, as Sydney says it, undo it.
Yeah.
That scene, the scene where they're having their angry fight, then their sad fight. Those are my favorite scenes. And then also, of course, Sydney's speech to him, where she's talking at him at the hospital.
Yeah.
Those things, like it's almost there's a definite arc from those 4 scenes. And I think that it's like the closest we'll ever get to being inside Sydney's mind and how she processes things. It's so beautiful. Is there anything you would like to say about like this kind of these conversations that they have?
Yeah, I mean, they were difficult to write because there were versions of them that were much sadder. There were versions of them that were much meaner. And I had to be really mindful of how I balanced it and what I wanted it to feel like, because it carried a lot of weight and it would like have broader implications to the story, you know? I didn't want to make Mark a total villain or monster. I didn't want to make Sydney a total saint, even though she's Saint Sydney. The first line of dialogue that Gail has in Screams is Saint Sydney. And I wanted it to feel realistic and complicated the way marriage and infidelity and all the and parenthood and all those things are complicated. Because we have to add, and it's something I think the real Scream 7 is going to do, is going to show the complications of just regular life as a mother and wife on Sydney on top of all this shit. And I think that, it's really easy to see somebody like Sydney Prescott as kind of one-dimensional in a sense, like she's only this thing. She symbolizes just this one thing. And so it was important to like make that dialogue feel like it was realistic, like it was painful, like it was important, but also through that dialogue to make their marriage feel lived in, from the sexy, playful moments in the kitchen to, because also like, Ghostface says to Mark, you went from Batman to Mr. Mom, to taunt him, to be like, is that why you fucked her? Is that why you want to punish Sydney for being so good and being so indomitable? And maybe he did, right? Like maybe that is part of it. Like, why do men cheat? Why does anybody cheat? Why does it, like there is a part of you that wants to get some gratification and is mindless. Maybe was a part of you that also subconsciously even maybe wants to hurt somebody or dominate them without doing it in some other way that is explicit, right? Like these are natural human emotions and instincts. And, in Scream 3, we get when Mark is very much a suspect because he's so intense and so weird in his moments with Sydney. Like there's something unspoken about his life that we don't get in 3. He just hints at it. He hints at a darkness, at a trauma that never gets revealed in 3. And there's more they could have done if they wanted to, but I think they wanted to keep it mysterious and, we don't need to know what it is. Sydney needs to be intrigued, but maybe also cautious and, all of those things. So I felt like those moments were important opportunities to give us a glimpse into their lives together the past 20 years. We can only have that if they tell us and show us. And so, yeah. I think your reading of it is spot on. I think that arc, I think those connections between their first encounter to their last moment together shared on screen, they're sleeping together, and then the last time we see them, they are, she's sleeping beside him in the chair in the hospital when he wakes up, right? So there is a symmetry there to some degree, but what happens in the middle is very messy in a way that I think is very true.
But you give them a happy ending or an ending of peace. And I think that it's appropriate for her to be by herself because she has been by herself, and I want to kind of I have like 2 things I want to talk about Sydney, and then we're going to move into just Sadie and Kayla briefly, and then we'll wrap up. But so with Sydney, something I haven't told you that I noticed while I've been performing and like kind of really getting into the script and editing is like we get every single version of Sydney Prescott in this script, like with and we're talking about these scenes with Mark, they're very Billy Loomis coded. Those conversations she has with Billy in Scream 1, that to me, like again, like the scene where they're yelling at each other in the kitchen, that to me is like the scene in the hallway with Billy whenever, Billy does the scene that's repeated in Stab with Luke Wilson in the hallway. Like I think that is the same vibe, like Sydney looking just shocked and devastated at him. That's Sydney in Scream 1. With Scream 2, I see Sydney in Scream 2 as like the most personality we get from her, especially in that opening act. You do the same thing here. You characterize her life, her marriage, her as a mom, her as a neighbor and friend, her just living out in the world, her training, how she actually prepares to be ready for any attacks. It's like everything that
you're right.
We see as a fully formed version of her personality and the warmth of her as a human being outside of the attacks, almost like in a Halloween Ends kind of a way. That's really beautiful. And we see the Sydney of Scream 3, her courage, of going to the house alone, to save Sadie and partake in whatever she needs to keep the ghost faces away from her own house. One of my favorite things that you wrote, and I don't know if I told you this, is like there's a moment in the final Scream where Sydney hears something and she's walking, and you describe her instincts and how her body shifts in front of us.
Yeah.
That is Sydney in Scream 4. Like that type of like plateau, like, is she doesn't have to do anything. She's on autopilot, but it's just, her body knows what to do. Like that, I just feel like we see every version of Sydney in this. And that's important because what you're doing is, all of that character development from these 9 films is being destroyed here and rebuilt. So I think it's important that she is represented in that way.
Yeah, I mean, you said that beautifully, and I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but you're right. I do give us kind of every version of Sydney because a person is every version of themselves. We are every past iteration of ourselves and every future iteration of ourselves at all times. We sort of access different parts of our lives and our experience, and so that was important for me to give to Sydney, especially somebody as rich as Sydney, like rich in character, rich in experience, rich in trauma, rich in personality. I mean, she's just a rich character. Like, it's so unusual for horror to begin with, but to have, and so much of that is Neve Campbell. It just is her. You could give her, a ton of dialogue. You give her no dialogue and she will hit it out of the park because she is so nuanced and so subtle, and so she really lives in the characters. And so 30 years on, I had to really think about how I would portray Sydney. But again, I'm thinking about Neve Campbell playing her as I'm writing her. And I think at this point, any franchise, hopefully every writer who's ever writing Scream movies is thinking about the character as played by the actor. That, that guides or dictates how they write the characters and what they write. But yeah, no, she is just, again, she is the anchor. She is important. She is the North Star. She is the core, and you have to, even when she's being brutalized, she is holding things together in a way, right? And still being resourceful as she can and holding many responsibilities and truths at the same time. Like, I have to get back to my kids, but I have to try to save Sadie, to do my, like, she has a sense of self and a sense of compassion and duty and service to other people that is really uncommon in the world, let alone in movies, right? And so how do you enact that without doing a Linda Hamilton thing, right? Like, how do you do it without,
you know how you do it? You do it whenever Gale Weathers chops Ross's head off. And Sydney, what does Sydney do? She goes to Sadie and covers her so she doesn't see that. Like, that is Sydney Prescott.
Right.
That is the essence of her.
Right.
So I have to ask about the bird metaphor, because this is kind of the ending for Sydney. This whole thing that with Joey Vallese started with Scream 7, where he wrote this surprise ending for me that I didn't know about, where Sydney, she has a vision that her daughters were Sam and Tara, and she closes their bedroom door and it's very cold. Like, it's like, it's almost like an omen for the what's to come. Like, she's deeply afraid that her daughters will be attacked by Ghostface, which lo and behold, here at the final Scream, they were. And you recreate it in a way, but you do it in a way that gives that peace. And because we see Sydney look on the app and they're asleep, they aren't Sam and Tara. They're good and happy and safe. But more importantly, you start this bird metaphor with Ella at the beginning of the movie, where she and Sydney go up and find this bird's nest, and they're talking about the hatchlings of the bird. Gail's there. She plays along, but she's like, yeah, we had to get up at the ass crack to see these birds. She gets it but doesn't get it. And then at the end, at sunset, Sydney goes up and looks in the bird's nest and it's empty. And it's, again, and we see a tear come down from Sydney's face. And it's a full circle moment. You do the Scream 3 door thing, just like we see the door at the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie. Totally different things. It's the same thing here. So why did you want to end this story this way? And what do you want the listeners to take away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to over-explain it because I do like it just sort of sitting there and to be thought-provoking. But I will say I didn't know it was the ending until I knew. It came really similar to the 7 final moment, came in sort of the last minutes. And I was like, oh yeah, like this is what has to happen. I love that Ella wakes Sydney up and says there's a ghost in my room in the beginning, which of course, is satisfying to everybody to hear. And then it's the warbling of these birds that are living in the vent. And you can understand why a little kid would think there was a ghost in the wall, right? Because of the warble, the echo. And Sydney shows her, she says, you don't have to be afraid. In fact, it's this other thing. It's this beautiful thing. It's this mother bird. And Ella wants to take the bird. And Sydney's like, no, you can't. We can't touch these birds. The birds need to do their own thing and we'll let them stay there. We're not going to disrupt them. And of course, Ella is adorable and says, I'm going to call this one with the red stripe Gale, right? And then we cut to Gale, which I love. And Sydney, she's reminded of the birds because of the fluttering of the other birds outside. And she stops and goes back to the ladder to see if they're there. And to see that the nest remains, but the birds aren't there, is a reminder, because just before, she checks to make sure the girls are okay and she sees them. And to have her check them through a piece of technology also felt important, right? To have her look on the app and look at their camera to make sure that they're safe. So she gets the comfort and confirmation that they're fine in bed, but then the reminder that she cannot protect them. The mother
Forever.
bird isn't there. She can't protect them. They're going to fly the coop at some point. They're going to leave the nest. They're going to be gone. And it's a reminder that she can't keep them safe forever, and that this the like the foundation, the structure of her life has been this battle to survive and this constant being hunted. Like the birds may have just left, but I don't know, the birds could have been taken by an animal, right? The birds could have been, who knows, like what could have happened? Like there's not clarity on what happened to these birds. They probably just left, but maybe not, So there's an ambiguity there. And the tear is a sort of like involuntary, well of emotion to see that they're gone, because it's a realization of many things for Sydney at once. And I hadn't forgotten about the birds, but when I was trying to devise an ending that felt appropriate and meaningful and held a metaphor and sort of felt like ambiguous as well, suddenly it was like, oh wait, Sydney would go back to check on the birds, and she doesn't remember to do it until there's a fluttering of the birds flying, that she hears, because she gets spooked, because Sydney is on edge, right? She's trying to relax. She has wine. She is sitting outside. She is trying to enjoy the sunset on her, and she just can't. And I think that's part of it too, that Sydney may never relax. It seems like we leave her in peace, but I don't know that we actually leave her in peace. I think, if anything, the events of this script remind her about the fragility and the possibility of this coming back, this not ending, So there is peace at the moment, but a reminder that peace in some ways echoes 7, because 7, the girls go to sleep. She's reading them the book about Dewey, and then she sees Tara and Sam, and just the handing of the phone, "It's for you," is like so haunting. So in some ways, those two feel like a companion final shot of each other.
I think this one's much warmer than the
yeah.
first one. Like the first one is cold.
7 is very ominous.
Yeah.
It's very, very ominous. Yeah.
Whereas here, I think that you're probably right. I think deep down, she's gonna be more prepared. She's gonna be more suspicious, more cautious about protecting the girls. But I think that's part of the struggle here with the bird, is like she knows that she can't forever, and there's only so much she can do. And I think that there is a peace that she has in knowing that everything is okay, and as opposed to Scream 7, where whatever.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. So I want to just briefly talk about Sadie, because you really love Sadie. I really love Sadie. You had a deep love for her whenever I started recording, and like I liked her just from the reading of it, and I understood her purpose and how she functioned and like why she was important. There was a huge transformation for me getting to actually say these words out loud whenever, especially in the finale. Like she becomes a holistic character, an emotionally complete character. She is devastating. Like I was reading, like even just listening back to the script yesterday, I was thinking whenever Sadie is living the reveal of Arthur and Max and the betrayal she feels, the shock she feels, the trauma from just having her mother murdered in front of her, like the way that you write that is so sinking painful.
Yeah.
I think the Krugers, they're the best original characters probably in your universe. Just as a unit, they feel in this script like as important as our survivor trio in some ways. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. And it was really hard to do, because we're at this point in the franchise, in real life and mine, where, killers have to be new characters, right? And new characters have to be body count. And there's just this like requirement, and it can only go in so many directions, right? I think it's actually one of the brilliant things that this first trailer for the real 7 did, is that we didn't really see any other characters. And I think that's smart to do, because we know the killers are probably going to be people that we've just met, and who knows how much screen time they'll have. But sort of hiding them from us was actually smart, because we could suspend our disbelief for a moment and not think about like, oh, it's probably this one, right? So like it does us that favor of kind of removing it. But because I have the ability in these scripts, particularly this one, to really develop characters, like I needed to develop Sadie and her parents. I needed the betrayal that occurs, like the load is shared. It's shared by Sadie and by Sydney. It's different for Sadie than it is for Sydney, but she too is realizing, oh, my mother is cheating on my father. This is all a lot. So she gets sort of this like truncated version of everything that happens to Sydney happens to Sadie in the scripts, right? So she gets everything that has happened to Sydney over time happens to her very quickly. So I needed her to feel real. I needed her to feel connected. And when I suddenly realized like, oh, Sharon is a good friend. Sharon lives in the neighborhood. Sharon's daughter, babysits or helps out with Sydney's kids and she's close to them. So everything had to feel like a real lived in, like they have known each other for years and years and years and trust each other, because that makes the betrayal of trust all the deeper and more cutting and devastating.
One thing I like about Sadie is I don't love new teen characters. So my adoration for both the Twinks and Sadie is notable, Joey.
Yeah.
But like the one thing you do with Sadie is like you make her very hip and of the moment, yet very kind and sweet. Like you make her in the image that like, I feel like what you do with Sadie, and this is intentional shade. Like this is what people think Radio Silence were doing with Sam, or what they wanted to achieve with Sam. Whereas like I could see like, if this were the real movie, you could pass the franchise off to Sadie after what has happened. Now I'm turning this into a question for you. Do you think that Sadie's reaction to Sharon and how hard she was on Sharon is how Sydney would have reacted to Maureen? Personally, I think Sydney wouldn't. I think that this is a trait of younger Gen Z kind of personalities, in terms of like how they process information. But then two, do you think she's okay? Do you think that there were copycats that followed Sadie into the future? Again, I'm kind of leaning no, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I think that Sydney, if given the information about the infidelity before Maureen's death, I don't think she would have been as mouthy as Sadie is, but I think that she would have sainted Neil and been like avoidant of Maureen. Like, I think she would be really, really critical of her, especially since we're talking about the mid-90s. There's so much more like shame and women and their sexuality and promiscuity. And like, it's really like in the culture, misogyny is forever, right? Patriarchy is perennial. But, Sydney, I think would have defaulted a bit to that sort of like, women hating on other women for their, like, I don't think she would have been able to like avoid it. I think it would have been like just a natural gut instinct and she would have felt betrayed and she would have really sided with Neil. That's what I think. So I think she would have reacted similarly, but without the sort of Gen Z sass that Sadie has and sort of the righteousness that she, sort of espouses. Now, I don't think Sadie is going to have anybody come after her. I think that it sort of dies with what has happened. And I think part of that too is the fact that Gail is not running with a story or writing a book. And I think that there is control here about how they sort of shape the narrative. I also think that the brevity of our news cycles also benefits somebody like Sadie, where like it'll be forgotten just as quickly as it has sort of occurred. And because Sydney was in, I think it's still Sydney's burden to bear going forward, because Sydney Prescott survived yet again. And I think if anybody is at risk of this happening, it will be Sydney again and not Sadie. That's my feeling. I think that I want to make a comment about Sadie's rejection and Sydney's acknowledgement of Sadie's rejection of what they tried to do is what will carry forward as the, protective bubble, as it were, that she will evade this fate because she actively rejected it when presented with it, right?
That line, again, tearing up, like, we're in the hospital where Sydney tells her this, you are Sadie Kruger. You rejected this. Like, you rejected the victimhood. You rejected the boxes that they tried to put you in. I mean, that's Sydney's journey in a lot of ways. And she sees it in Sadie. And that's what's so beautiful about how you kind of like give this parallel and this reminder to Sydney. When Sydney says that to Sadie, it's as much to Sadie to comfort her and to help her get on the right track as it is for Sydney to remind herself of this,
Yeah. Well, and Sadie can reject it because of Sydney. You know what I mean? Like, because she has Sydney there and Sydney as a model, and the Sydney Prescott story has permeated culture and generations at this point, that there's almost like a guidebook to be like, I don't want to do that. It's like Sadie, it's funny when Ross is like, this generation can't fucking commit to anything when he kills Max. It's like Sadie is like quiet quitting the final girl. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be like, right? And it's like there's a funny way to look at it, but also like I don't want this. I don't want to be famous for this. Like, I don't want to do this, right? Like, and the fact that she even like, there is a subtle like funny Gen Z like, oh, you have a choice. You survived a massacre. Like, you get to choose not to be, kind of a funny thing where it's like Ross is being like, you don't really have a choice. Like, we're doing this. This has happened, right? And Sadie holds the knife. She stabs her father, you know, and can't go through with it. But it's also because she sees Gail coming in and knows that Gail's going to do it. She knows Gail's got there with an axe. So it's like, I don't have to do it. You know, it's like mama and auntie kind of take care of it, you know, like, well, yeah.
And like, what, Wes Craven, he talked about like the idea both with Nightmare and with Scream about this idea of like good triumphing over evil and the good not being tainted by the evil. And I think that you carry that through with Sadie so strongly. I couldn't help but think of Wes's words whenever I was reading Sadie's lines, and like with the knife at Ross's chest, and it goes away, and she says, "I can't, Sydney, I can't." Like, that is the spirit of what Wes Craven did with Scream, at least the original Scream, and like how he viewed Nancy in Nightmare. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that.
And there's even the Nancy reference in the opening when Ghostface says this, not a dream. You don't have to control anything here, Nancy, right? Like, because there is this like, this sort of dominance that these killers are trying to sort of like grab, and yeah.
Well, so let's talk about the opening, because there's actually there's a funny thing like between Joey and me. As I was recording the script, I feel like I was a big fan of Kayla, because like, here's the thing: when Joey sent me the first draft of the opening, I loved it. But then after the first draft happened, that's when we picked that Ariana would be the character, and then Joey beefed up the opening and added so much more. He added Sydney's phone call, like the voicemail. He added Kayla talking to the killer back and forth, the Ghostface holding the baby, and it just transformed the opening into something that I wasn't even. I couldn't. I remember reading it for the first time, I was just like, wow, this is next level shit. I have been a stan of Kayla ever since. And as I was recording until I got to the finale, I feel like there was this battle with me and Joey, like, who is the better new character? Is it Kayla or is it Sadie? And Sadie wins, of course, because of everything that happens in the finale. I love this opening, Joey. This is like, whenever you had the first draft, I was like, oh, Joey is doing his own modern version of Casey Becker. And you do that, but you do so much more than that. Like, there's like, in terms of the way you talked about being novelistic, the opening, it's like 20 pages of just like you like reciting this long prose and like, describing the setting and the environment. And that's what Scream fans want. Scream fans want to see something glorious visually, and you give it to them through your words here. And I just fell in love with Kayla as a person, even though like she's presented more vapidly at the beginning. We begin to see the humanity with her as the scene goes on. And again, like, I just want to reference the meta of it all. Like the, not only, Rosemary's Baby and When a Stranger Calls and Stab, like on the projection, but like Psycho, Norman, I got to be Anthony Perkins. This was like the best thing. And, references to Mother. It's just like, I love this opening so much. I think like, it would be one of the best openings if it was filmed. I think Kayla would actually be one of the greatest opening characters, if not the greatest, just as a person, just as a figure. Yeah. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love Kayla too, and I'm sad for her. And she, we find out later, is a flawed character as well, right? We find out that she is, it's not her fault that she's also sleeping with Sharon, but we find out that she gets fired because she is being a bit sloppy about her influencer, videos, and that, she filmed some of it that caught the number of the house, and people figured out that she was working for Sydney and Mark. And, so she's flawed, but doesn't deserve what happens to her. She is protective of Arlo. She's really trying to do the right thing. And the fact that she's forced to murder Norman, that she is, and I hope people catch and love when we have the fake out about killing Ross, that Max is forcing Sadie to almost stab her own father. And I want that, that mirroring, because it's really twisted and shows that, there is this like desire to control the script that these killers have. I feel really bad for Kayla, and I think that she never stands a chance. And in some ways this is not only for me, and I'm sure that it's evident to people who are diehards, and I'm sure it was evident to you, but it's not only a recreation and a new version of Casey, and he even calls her Casey on purpose, and she corrects him and says Kayla, but it's also a reimagining of the Cotton Weary murder, because what does the Ghostface want? Tell me how to get to Sidney Prescott. And of course, they live in the neighborhood, so they can get to her, but they want those codes. They want to be able to terrorize somebody and get that information to make there's a pragmatic quality to killing Kayla. It will send a message, it will scare them, but they also orchestrate it so it seems like it is a closed murder, which is also unusual, right? That when Gail goes to investigate, and Kayla stays alive or the memory of her, because we get to see her crime scene afterwards, which is an homage to the crime scene being cut out of 4.
Mm-hmm.
But we see the crime scene, we see Gail piecing this together. We know that she tells Sidney, shout out to Josh Reinhold for
that note,
telling me, give me that one note and saying, no, Gail would tell Sidney I'm going to a crime scene just in case, and that made all the difference in the world. And then she's alive because we have conversation about her, and then she's alive because we find out that Sharon was sleeping with her as well. So her presence stays in a way that I think other movies don't keep the presence of the opening victims throughout the film, and I think they should, and it should be meaningful. It should not just feel like a one-off. And so I love Kayla and what she stands for. She is kind of a modern Casey, but she's different, and she doesn't stand a chance because the killer is in the house the entire time, and she really does die trying to protect both the baby and Sidney. She gets stabbed in that moment because she tells Siri to call Sidney. And, that's a fatal thing that she does. And also having the baby holding the ghost face mask, it would have been too much to have him wearing it. It would have felt a little too Halloween and too silly, but to have them come home and find their child soaked in blood that's not his, holding this mask, felt like it was also signaling to us the continuity of Ghostface, the icon, into generations. This baby who is part of a massacre and has no idea that they're part of a massacre, is very chilling to me.
Well, and also, having a young child in the opening also sets the tone and connects, yes, this is about family. This is a domestic movie. This is about little kids, meaning Sydney's. And I'm glad that you brought up Kayla being there for a reason. She's chosen for a reason in the way that Cotton was. There's a lot of nice little things, like the photographs, throughout, very Scream 3. But,
it comes back at the end. It comes back in the finale when Sydney walks in and there's a trail of photographs leading her upstairs. Yeah.
The thing that I most remember about the opening from the first time I read it in June of 24 was the image of her on the white carpet. That to me, I was like, wow, Joey has done it, because the idea of a blood red soaked carpet and Ariana Grande's body on top of it, I mean, that's just it's so chilling and so original. So I really, really loved that. So, and this is my favorite opening that you've done. Sorry, Tara, but this is it's just, I don't know, I love it. I think it's just brilliant. So
I love all my openings. I think if I were to be hired to do at least one thing in a Scream script, I could give them opening after opening after opening, because it's the thing that I love about the franchise. It's the thing that it reawakened. It created a lot of copycats and a lot of dilution over time, even within the franchise to some degree. But I just love the tone-setting quality of a Scream opening sequence, and they should feel like their own little movie that gets us going for what's to come, but it should also feel connected to motive. It shouldn't feel sort of on its own island the way sometimes it can, And I say this having written Screams, which is basically a short movie that is completely separate in one sense from the rest of the script, but is not, because it is people at the 30th anniversary, 30 events in 30 cities that Gail has done for the 30th anniversary. So it's very much, part of what happens, and a comment on the media and the ways in which the story kind of lives on, both by choice and not by choice. So yeah, I some might be recency bias, but I do agree that overall I feel like this script is the one that would sort of engage me the most, I think, of the three, but it's hard to say. I would love to see all of them in real life, sort of emerge. But yeah, there's more to say. I'm sure we'll talk about it in future episodes with other people, but yeah.
Well, I have one small note for you too, is like the way you write Ghostface here is so beautiful. Like the way that you describe his action and his body movements and the way that he glides into the frame when characters don't see him, very much like in tune with like the Wes Craven Scream 2, Scream 3 era with the body language. I think that was really, really smart. Both with like, in like when he glides in and out of frames, but also the action and the intensity. You describe him as Michael Myers at one point. I love that. And speaking of Michael Myers, I do think that it's also fun that we gave Jamie Lee Curtis this little cameo where she, I mean, some people may be disappointed by her role, but I don't think that they should be, because we literally got to make her Ghostface. We see her take off the mask and like if she were in the film, she would give a really gut-wrenching performance seeing the death of Alfie Woodard. So I think that was fitting.
She and Alfre get great scenes, like their intro walking and talking to Sid, the party. Also, the red herring of Ross helping them with their cell phones at the party and helping them with
Love
their
it.
so it's. I wanted people to think for a moment, could it be these two like 70-year-old lesbians? Could they really be the killers? And also their actions are also a perversion of the mothering of Sydney that they do, because I believe they care about Sydney, but when push comes to shove, they're like, oh no, we can't let, like the way they behave and what they do is so manipulative and so consequential, and the fact that they don't realize there's a real fucking attack happening at the moment that they're coming in, is like a real, there was a version of it where they got revealed and then killed by the real Ghostface, but I found it to be much more satisfying to have this Gale sequence with them. And
well, and don't you, as a gay man, like I felt like I felt like I understood exactly who they were, because like I feel like some like older like gay men have definitely, or even lesbians, have tried to give me advice that has been unsolicited, and I reacted the same way that Sydney does. So I just think that it was actually very true to life. But but so there are at least 3 songs get like name drops. I don't know if Joey did it on purpose. I would like to think that he did, but I don't think he did. We get All Too Well, we get Out of the Woods, we get Cardigan. The first 2, I definitely like. I don't know if you when you hear them, you're gonna be like, oh wow, Ryan, you really geeked out. But I did pause. Ross knew this all too well.
Okay, all right. I think that it's more a testament to Taylor Swift taking very pedestrian turns of phrases and making beautiful songs out of them. I think it's more about that.
Bird. Okay. All right.
Hey, I'm not insulting Taylor, and I love All Too Well.
Joey.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for these scripts. Thank you for everything that you've done with this. Like, I'm honored that you gave me these scripts to include in the podcast, and they will forever be like a central part of why people love this show. I get compliments on them all the time. And I think that like this script, this one that we put out last week, is what I want. When they think of a script, Ryan C. Showers, I want them to think of this one. It's all you. You wrote a masterpiece. I understand every choice you made. And so thank you. Please tell people where they can find you. It Came from the Closet, etc.
Yes, thank you for all that. And thank you for the opportunity to do this. Again, there's no world in which I would have done this, because it wouldn't have felt, you know what I mean? Like if it just felt like, what am I doing? I'm writing these like fake spec scripts and so to have the occasion, the context, and the to know there's a listenership who wants it, and to do this right on the eve of a new movie feels really gratifying and exciting and in conversation with whatever is to come. So I really appreciate it. I look forward to talking more about it. I want to hear from people and hear their thoughts. You can find me on Instagram at It Came From The Closet _ between each word. That's my only social media presence at the moment. I'm working on rebuilding my website, which eventually will house all 3 spec scripts, so they'll be there. It Came From The Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror by Feminist Press. That is my book, an anthology of queer and trans writers writing about horror movies that shaped them and shook them. It makes an amazing gift for the horror lover in your life. It is a project I'm so proud of. I said last week, but I have met so many people and have so many people who've found the book through this podcast, and that means the world to me. The book means the world to me. It still has legs and new people discover it all the time. So if you haven't yet, it would be amazing if you sought that out, whether it's at your library or listening to the audiobook on Spotify or buying an actual copy. It's a beautiful book. It has illustrations. The cover is incredible. The colors are really amazing. So if there's an occasion to buy a gift for somebody to actually hold something wonderful, I cannot commend it more strongly. And thank you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for, if the response wasn't so brilliant to the first one, I never would have made the second, and I certainly wouldn't have done the third without Ryan's pestering, but also your desire to hear it and to have a conclusion to this. And I'm very, very proud of it. I feel like I've done real writing and real just the creative exercise and freedom that I had with this was really, really special because I love these movies more than anything. So it feels great to marry those two parts of my life.
And can I just say, I feel like you understand Scream so deeply, and you understand the characters and like the story structure, and like you just understand Scream in the way that I do. And I think that's why we've had such a successful partnership here, and why, I say partnership, but you've done this has been your baby. I've been, like I said, I've been along for the ride, and I'm just privileged to have been able to do that. And like how you were saying about like the anthology being your baby, the scripts are like my baby. Like I'm so proud that I could do this for my listeners, but for you and for the literature that you wrote here. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And listeners, anybody who's keeping track, I would love to hear all the little domestic thriller Easter eggs that you find, because there's a lot and they're in there. So find them. Let me know what you found.
All right.
Thank you,
Joe.
Ryan. Thank you, everybody.
All copyrighted material used or referenced in this show belong to their rightful owners and made possible by the Fair Use Act.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
Get another beer, you want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back!